Hello, I'm Tom, your friendly neighborhood atheist, and the gist of the show is growing up, I only knew atheists as basically old white guys, people like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Dan Barker, and basically all Christians. And that's what I thought of atheism. And it wasn't until I got a little older and exposed to more cultures and more people, and I realized that atheists could be anything. So I came up with the idea of this show to highlight everyone else except for the old white guys because, well, I cover the old white guy category. Anyways, today I have with me Doug Wright, who is a Navy. What's your position?
I'm a chief petty officer.
What was the religion of the house, and how religious was the family?
Hmm. Well, the religion of our house was basically Christian. I guess we leaned Baptist because we always tended to go to Baptist churches. My stepfather didn't believe in God, but we never talked about that. It was predominantly what my mother put forth, which was, we're Christians. And I wholeheartedly subscribed to that. I was a Christian growing up. And I never really questioned it. I was also a pretty big reader too, and I love science. So I think you see where this is going. I used to read quite a bit, all the time, anything I could get my hands on. And of course, it prompted questions when I went to Sunday school. I go there and the teacher would be saying this, that, and the other, and I'd ask a question. I was that guy, that kid, and it was like, oh, if the Earth's only 6,000 years old, dinosaur bones, how do you account for that? And
I was the
I
same
really
kid.
got the answer that you hear in satire and things like that, or jokes, which was the devil put them there to test our faith. So once I started getting answers like that, and it only, of course, prompted more questions. And I think it was around that point and reading stories from the Bible. I had a big book of Bible stories. And I remember reading a story about how God held the sun in the sky for an entire day. And I remember agonizing over that one for a long time. I was like, wait a minute, the sun doesn't really move. The earth would have had to stop. And if the earth stopped on its axis, wouldn't it have caused all the oceans to slosh over and all these tidal waves? And
The
I
Great
think
Flood.
we noticed, right? So, it was things like that. It just slowly chipped away to the point where by the time I was 18, I didn't consider myself a Christian anymore, but I was still pretty spiritual.
Yeah.
So I started looking for other religions. I looked into Islam. I looked into Buddhism, just trying to fill the gap, And I started thinking about it more and more, and came to the conclusion that everybody that has faith is pretty much faithful based on what they were taught
Yeah.
or where they live. And once I got my mind wrapped around that concept, I was kind of forced to face the fact that, there's probably no real true religion, which means if the religions aren't true, then where's the truth about God? And it kind of sort of leaned me into atheism. So I was just pretty much an atheist for a few years. Wasn't very satisfying. I wasn't happy with it, but I had to embrace it because that's where my reason brought me. And once I discovered humanism, that's when everything started clicked into place. And it wasn't like I read the Humanist Manifesto and thought, I'm going to start doing this stuff. It was more like I read it and I was like, I already live my life this way.
Yeah.
And it just kind of validated it in a sense. So I embraced it, and I've been humanist ever since, and very happy with it. So that's pretty much my story of faith.
So do you have any siblings?
I have a brother. I have a half brother. Actually, I have three half brothers and three half sisters. Only one of which I actually grew up with. They live on the East Coast, and my other half brother lives in Las Vegas.
So your stepfather already was a non-believer. How did your mother respond to you losing your faith?
Well, that was interesting. She didn't take it well. She accepts it now,
Yeah.
but she doesn't agree with it. But we have kind of a tacit agreement to, I will live my life my way, and I'll respect, what you believe. You respect what I believe or don't believe. and when we'll meet in the middle somewhere. She is uncomfortable with it, as many Christians are, with being confronted with someone close to them that doesn't believe in God. It kind of brings us. It kind of brings some tension,
Yeah.
some or not confirmation bias, some struggle with her, because I'm sure, growing up in the church, she's always believed that non-believers were evil, and probably shouldn't, not the type of people that you want to hang around, because they don't have morals, right? We don't have morals. We don't believe in God, so how could we have morals? So, so it was kind of a struggle for her, but I mean,
I
she's
can't imagine it was too surprising for her if her husband was a non-believer.
well,
Or
that's the thing. He wasn't vocal about it. It was just his stance, and she just kind of accepted it. I think maybe in the future she thought maybe that he would come around, but no, he never did.
I know. I'm sure my wife wishes. My wife is Catholic.
Fortunately, my work wasn't that much cut out for me because she's Japanese. So the culture she grew up in, it was either Shinto or Buddhist.
Yeah.
Which neither one of them are based on a god.
Yeah.
In the sense that the Abrahamic faiths are. So she understood not believing in God. She was good with it, but she believes there's something out there.
Yeah.
So she's good with the way I believe. She thought I was a little bit out there at first, like I was coming on a little bit too strong, until she realized just how bad it is in the United States when it comes to evangelical Christianity. Yeah. Just how rough or how hard they can push to make sure that their way stays their way and there is no other way. In a lot of cases, I won't say in all of them, or probably even in most of them, but there are enough of them out there to make it seem like that's the way that it's going. And I mean, if you look at politics, I mean, that says it all.
Yeah, the fundamentalists are the ones that are most outspoken. They're the ones making the most noise, and that's who everybody hears. In fact,
I'm sorry, who is?
Last election that kind of started me on my path of being more outspoken, because it got to the point where religion has become so pervasive in just the government that I really it bothers me a lot, and I felt the need to express that dissatisfaction or discomfort with it, and that's why I started the YouTube channel. Not so much to get viewers, but just so I could put it out there and see if anybody agreed with me.
It's a great thing to live in America, isn't it?
So, at what point did your lack of religion start, I guess, affecting your military career? When did it get to a point where I guess there was a discomfort or an internal conflict for you?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, you got to kind of understand the military, the way the military works. Everything is pretty open, and everything, they try to base everything, even though there's a tier system as far as rank and all that, they try to make it so that it's fair. So if the lowest person on the totem pole, if they feel like something didn't go quite the right way as far as regulation or fairness or something, they're able to voice that. And the checks and balances that the military has in place does a fairly good job of addressing those type of things. So it's not like in the civilian world where you may have a boss, you may hate him, you may say all these things, but there's nothing you can do about it because that's your boss, and if you speak out, you're fired. It doesn't work that way in the military. We work on a set of principles that are based on fairness inside of the system, so that everybody gets an equal shot at making rank and being able to do the job that you're capable of doing without anything else being a factor, like race, religion, creed, etc. On the whole, I think the military does a fairly good job of that. So we have a little bit more freedom to express ourselves without needing to feel a backlash because of it.
Yeah.
So we can freely speak, and people may disagree, but at the end of the day, it's not going to come back and bite us in the ass the way it could in the civilian sector, where you can be fired pretty much for that reason.
Yeah.
So anyhow, it didn't really affect my military life until there was one. It was, let's see, we went on deployment in 2012. So I was on board a ship called USS Rents. She's decommissioned now, and we were about to go on what's called a deployment. So you use a 6 to 8 month trip outside of your home port to do a mission. In our case, our mission was to go south of the border and go fast that we're trying to smuggle drugs up the coast. So we were out there for 7 months. What happens when, among other things, when you're working up for a deployment is the regional chaplains will start asking the crew who would like to be a lay leader. Now, a lay leader is someone that acts in absence of a chaplain. So they can do some things that chaplains can do, not all the things. They don't have all the privileges, but they can do some of the rites, the consecrations, for example, during a Catholic Mass, or they can hold a Protestant gathering and do those. Since our ship was small, we didn't have our own chaplain. So they started asking for volunteers to be lay leaders.
So it's kind of a religious deputy.
Basically, yeah, that's the perfect way to put it. So I already had accreditation with MAF and with and not at the time, but soon to come afterward, American Humanist Association, to be a lay leader. So when the paperwork came to me, I filled it out and put humanist, turned it back in. More like as a joke, really, than anything else. I mean, I was just satisfying my own kind of sense of humor on that one. It's like, all right, yep, I'm a humanist, make me a lay leader, right? See what happens. Well, I got the email back a couple of weeks later, said, you're good to go, come in for the training. So, I was like, wow, really? You're gonna let me do this? Sweet. I was happy. I started to get happy, and the more I thought about how much I would be able to kind of set people straight as far as what humanism is and atheism is, at least on my ship, and kind of cut through the misconceptions, the more excited I got about it. And not to mention, kind of reach out to those folks I knew were in hiding and not wanting to speak out.
Yeah.
About their non-belief, because I mean that stigma is still there, even if the playing field's even, and a lot of people just are not comfortable with talking about it. And sometimes all it takes is one person to say, I'm that guy or I'm that girl, and they'll start stepping forward. Demographics kind of back that up as far as non-believers in the military as a whole. So anyway, I missed the training, so I had to contact the chaplaincy directly to basically arrange for some back training. To let them, do their thing, let me answer the questions or whatever they had to do. Mm-hmm. And the question came up as I was typing back and forth in emails of what my faith was, and I said I was a humanist, secular humanist. So I got the email back, oh, I'm sorry, the Navy doesn't support humanism at this time. So it's like, well, I kind of knew that because I'd been working with math at this point.
Yeah. The
more I started thinking about it, the more it kind of upset me, because the chaplaincy's core mission is not to promote religion in any way. It is to support the service member, the sailor. That's what they're there for. Yes, they do all the other things that they can do under their own religious, hat. But at the end of the day, they're there to support the sailor. So if there's a Christian chaplain and a Jewish kid walks in and needs counseling, they're supposed to be able to do that. So that's what they're there for. And to say that my life stance is less important or not worth their time to even support, I had a problem with it. So sorry.
I say, so you're already you're involved with math. Now, tell a little bit what that is.
Military Association of Atheists and Freethinkers. So we're a 501 Charlie 3 nonprofit. Been around for a while. President Jason Torpy. You can find his YouTube videos as well. And if you search American Atheists, is that the right URL? I think it is. AmericanAtheist.org. It pulls up the MAF website, I think. Don't hold me to that. If somebody's watching this and they pull up something different, I apologize. But if you just type in Military Association of Atheists and Freethinkers, you'll definitely get there.
Or just
So,
MAAF?
MAAF. So what our mission is one is to anybody that's out there that's a non-believer, that's a humanist, that's doesn't believe in God in any way, shape, or form, we're there to support them. So we're there to say, hey, we're just like you. We're in the military. We also don't believe in God or anything like that, and hang out with us. So we're there for moral support, basically. On one side.
Yeah.
The other side, we're kind of a watchdog organization in that we kind of try to ensure that there's no overreach on the chaplaincy side. So, did you hear the story about the Air Force, the airman that was not almost wasn't allowed to re-enlist in the Air Force because they refused to say "So help me God" in the oath, and a couple organizations stepped in to make sure that that problem got corrected. But it's kind of an example of some of the things that can happen that infringe on secular or just anybody's rights to not acknowledge or practice religion.
Do you know that the military's, I want to say excuse, but their justification to insist that a recruit say those words?
Tradition. It's the tradition and the fact that the chaplaincy is 70% evangelical Christian. If you think about that, it's pretty mind-boggling because if you take the demographics for the military and the Navy, those numbers are nowhere near matching. So you have kind of an overabundance of these evangelicals that are representing the chaplaincy, that are kind of pushing the policies, that are giving the advice on how religion and religious freedom or religious representation should be handled in the military or in the Navy, I should say. The representation is not matching the reality. As I'm sure you know from the Pew polls, the number of non-believers is rising rapidly, and the military is just a cross section of that. So still the same civilians joining up, right? So that number shifts in the military as it does in the outside. And if the chaplaincy is staying the same, but everybody else is changing around them, then you have kind of a problem because now they're not. It seems like a contradiction when I say that it's the chaplaincy's job to support all sailors, but if a non-believer walks into a chaplain's office, more often than not, they will either be kind of given a faith-based opinion or guidance, or maybe simply told to talk to a counselor.
Yeah.
Which counselors are a lot less accessible than chaplains. So, which is kind of the reason why I believe that humanist lay leaders and a humanist chaplain is more than needed in today's Navy or even in the military in general.
Well, nothing helps an atheist than to be told you should pray on it.
Exactly. All you gotta be told that one time and you're off that bandwagon for forever. Like you never want to go back because that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for some reason-based advice on how to deal with the problems in your life, not to, kind of give it up to God and everything comes out for the best. That's fine for some people. It's not fine for atheists or humanists, and they kind of need something that's more geared toward them for that type of support. And it's time to have somebody like that has access, the same access and the same support as the chaplains do, so that they can turn around and support the troops of non-belief, sailors, airmen, soldiers, Marines.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm wondering what kinds of things that you're doing to promote humanism and to support MAF.
Military is yes. Well, that's a great question. Right now, I'm just trying to kind of gather the rest of the military heathens together and trying to find them so that they can find us and we can kind of grow. One great way to do that is to interact with the other secular coalitions and organizations in San Diego area, which fortunately there are quite a few, and they work very well together. So I've just kind of meshed myself with them to try to help get the message out. So, I work with North County Heathens. I work with Sunday Assembly, San Diego. I work with, what's the one I just said? Oh, San Diego Coalition of Reason. Work closely with a lot of the leaders of those groups and just try to make myself useful. At the same time, try to reach out to service members in the area so they know about us and at least know we exist, so that if they want to come by and hang out with us, they can. They know that they can.
You're getting ready to retire from the military. Do you plan to keep connected to it at all and continue your work in helping people find, I guess, a community and find each other?
Well, that's the great thing. Apparently, I don't have to step down once I retire. So I can hold on to it for as long as I want to, or until they find somebody better. So, I plan on holding on to it for a while because, it's something that I enjoy doing, and I like to see the growth that comes from, pushing it out there and just kind of increasing the bubble of support for the service members in San Diego. And there are a bunch. I mean, we're a huge hub of military activity down here. So it's not like you're working in, Mississippi or Florida or North Carolina or something like that. I mean, it's California. It's fairly liberal, and it's much easier to find non-believers out here than it would be in some other areas.
But they still really need that because, the hardest thing about losing your faith is you realize that you're going to be losing a big chunk of your community. And for some people, you lose your family, because I know lots of people who have basically parted way with a good chunk of their family because they no longer believe what their family believed, and their family couldn't handle it. And I know it's very important to be able to find community and find others who, I don't want to say agree with you, but have the same viewpoint and can understand the trials and tribulations of not believing.
Religion has a lot of things going for it. I mean, it has that, like you just said, it has the community aspect. It has the get to live after I die aspect. It has it has the faith just by just a good feeling of knowing somebody's watching you aspect to it. I mean, there's several, and they all interlink, and they create this extremely strong net from which it's very difficult to escape. The more things that we have available to allow people to kind of crawl out of that net, the better. So yes, that kind of thing is needed. Once in a while on Saturdays, we're at the Balboa Park in San Diego, and we have a little booth set up. Not math, but
I've been there.
Have you really? Huh.
My cousin lives in Oceanside.
Ah, okay. So that's awesome.
We went to go visit him a couple of years. We were there, so
yeah,
I'm familiar. I've got pictures there.
It's a great place. It's a great bunch of people to hang out with and talk to, and you get quite a gamut of characters that walk by, either saying, "Hey, love the booth," or "Really?" You get those people that are like, "Wow, so this is what atheists look like. Let me try to save these people real quick." And they're usually in for a rude awakening when that happens.
Well, I always, whenever somebody brings up the afterlife, I always like to bring up this example. It's like, have you ever had your mother ask you why you don't call more often? And 9 out of 10 times they'll be, yeah, she says that all the time. It's like, okay, imagine an eternity with your mother saying, why didn't you call me more often when you were alive? Like that's the more I think of an afterlife, the less
there with you. That's too funny. But so I can imagine doing anything for an eternity. It would bother me, I think. I mean, you got to run out of stuff to do after a while. you can't just spend your entire life in a state of limbo bliss, just internally happy forever and ever. It just doesn't make sense.
No.
Something's got to be stimulating that. I know it does here, but maybe my mind, in a Christian's mind, your mind can't encompass how great, heaven is or whatever. But when you look in the Bible and it says the streets are paved with gold, somebody was trying really hard to kind of get that point across that this is the greatest place ever and you'll never get tired of it. Yeah, you will. You will get tired of it eventually, and you can't leave because it's eternity. That doesn't appeal to me.
Yeah, I understand the fear of death, and I understand wanting to imagine that your loved ones are not truly gone. But just the idea of eternity, just, most of my relatives I get tired of in one afternoon.
Right. And I think they kind of overplayed their hand. I mean, reincarnation is enough for most people to go, okay, I'm in. Because you get to live again, right?
Yeah.
And it beats that fear of death, knowing that it's not permanent or thinking that it's not permanent when it is. That's a strong thing with human beings. I mean, it plays right into the core of what drives them, which is, to avoid death.
Yeah.
And we're driven by the need to eat, sleep, reproduce, and not die. So, fear of death is pretty strongly ingrained in us. And, people figured out that, hey, we can use this to our advantage, kind of work it into this thing where, hey, if you do what we want now, you can have anything you want after you die.
Yeah.
Can you prove it? No, but it's right here in this book, and you just gotta have faith.
I'm not sure who initially who said this, but I already use it on my daughter. My daughter, she's 7, and she's already thinking about death. And she asked me, "What happens when you die?" And I said, "Remember before you were born?" And of course, she said, "No." It's like, that's what happens to you after you die.
I've heard that one before, and I like it a lot. I think I've used that one as well. You won't know because you'll be dead. It'll be the same way as it was before you were born. You're not conscious. You don't know what's going on. And then I also throw in the people, not only people, but animals and the whole gambit have been around for billions of years. They've all done it.
Mm-hmm.
And you should consider yourself lucky that you get to experience it for the short time that you can before, it passes on and it's time for somebody else to have their turn. I mean, if everybody dies, I mean, how scary could it be?
Yeah. I mean, I understand. And my big thing, my daughter's big thing is, she doesn't want to miss us. She doesn't.
It's a difficult thing to get kids to understand because they're not trying to understand death.
Yeah.
They'd rather death didn't exist. And when they're confronted with it, it's kind of jarring.
I try to, I've used the "you are stardust," not argument, but the example of, everything you're made of was created in the stars, and it will go back and be recycled. Because I'm big on recycling, and I'm trying to get her interested in recycling and trying to make death in the viewpoint of it's recycling.
That's a good one. I think that's something we could improve on as a community, is putting forth a better message to children about dealing with death. I'm sure it's been done already and I just haven't seen it, but I just haven't really seen any really shining examples of how to approach children with as non-believers with no carrot to speak of.
Yeah.
And explain, why death isn't such a bad thing.
I mean, religion really preys on people's fear, and that's, who's an easier target than kids? And
listen to anything you say.
So
that's why they want you to baptize them when you're old and keep them in the church. They know that once those core beliefs set in, and they do at that young age, it's very difficult to kind of shrug out of them. So.
I mean, I was unusual where I went to church, but I got in trouble in Sunday school. Basically, got kicked out because I was too questioning. Because I never really bought the stories, and it's funny because I just assumed, we grew up with Christmas and we grew up with church, and believed in Santa Claus and believed in God as a little kid, but gave up on the belief of God and Santa Claus about the same time,
Right.
and assumed it was the same thing with the rest of my family. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized that even though, they knew Santa Claus was, made up, they still thought God was real. And I was blown away. I just,
Santa Claus brings gifts, but God brings eternal life. I mean, how you gonna trump that? I mean, if I was a kid, when I was a kid, I believed it because that was great. I mean, hey, I don't have to worry about death because I'm gonna live forever. Forget about it, right? It's just a very easy thing to hold on to, especially when everybody around you believes the same thing. There's no reason to question it. It's a great thing. And that's why I believe most people stick with their faith. I mean, a lot of people just don't travel outside of their bubble far enough to be able to put in perspective
yeah.
Just how fragile or tenuous that faith can be when presented with other factors, like there's billions of people that also believe this and there's millions of people that also believe that. Basically the same thing, just a little bit of a twist to it. Which one's right? But I think
was
somebody
lucky.
did it.
A good chunk of my family is Jewish, and Christians of every flavor. And we've got all kinds of Christians in my family. So I saw a lot of different churches and I heard a lot of different stories, and they all conflict with each other and they all say they're right. So I guess I'm lucky. That's probably why religion never really took hold in me, because I was getting conflicting messages from the get-go.
Um,
How about you? How's your extended family? Are they all pretty well the
they're
same
all pretty much
Christian?
believers. They're all pretty much believers. I am the black sheep. Um, as you can imagine, I mean, especially among African Americans, I would say easily 95% of them, probably more than that, are believers in the United States. And faith is something that's taken very, very seriously in the African American community,
That
which makes it so much harder for African Americans that don't believe to find support or to even voice their mind about their non-belief. It just they know they're gonna run into problems. So they rather just stay quiet, it's kind of in the background, just keep it to themselves. But you're finding that more and more of them are coming out. Mandisa is a great example of that. She runs Black Non-Believers, and she's doing great work in Atlanta, getting coalition together and just making a comfortable bubble for non-believers pretty much everywhere, and kind of putting a different face on atheism in general.
like say, are you familiar with Steve Hill?
Yes, I actually met him a few times. I went to a couple of his comedy shows when he was here in San Diego, and I hosted a viewing of a documentary that he's been promoting called Contradiction.
Yes.
So that was at the San Diego Malcolm X Library that was viewed at, and that went over pretty well. Oh yeah, we've worked together before. And he's another one that's kind of putting a different face on atheism. And the fact he ran for office here in California recently.
And he's doing it again.
Yeah, so he'll be doing it again next year. So I'm looking forward to that.
I give him a bit of credit for the idea of this show. Part of his routine is, it's hard being a black man because, racism is everywhere. But to be an atheist black man, not only are you dealing with the rest of the world because you're black, you're dealing with all the blacks because you don't believe what they believe. So he's getting it from both sides. And
if you happen to be gay, I mean, there you go.
Yeah.
You're just done. Unfortunately, that's the way things are.
It just, I have a hard time with women and blacks being religious because, I mean, blacks are Christian because the people who brought them here were Christians, and they were. And I told this to my wife. The only reason she's Catholic is because Spain conquered Mexico, and anyone who didn't convert to Catholicism was killed, and so that's why she's Catholic. And the way women are treated in every religion.
Yes. And I
I
mean, it's blatant. I mean, if you just read the scriptures, and every one of them is obvious that they're not even second-class citizens. They're property
yeah,
in their eyes. I mean, Leviticus, all the talk in Leviticus about women, it's all property law for women.
yeah,
Paying 40 shekels of silver or 30 or whatever it is, if the girl's raped and it's found that she actually was raped and didn't, have sex willingly, you have to pay the father 40 shekels of silver. Really? That's property damage payment.
yeah,
Because now she's not a virgin anymore, and she's no good as marriage as a wife.
yeah,
So it's just so many ways. I mean, Eve was the reason why for the downfall of man, for eating from the apple. Women are less clean. You're not supposed to touch them during their period. And if they gave birth to a girl, then they have to be isolated for twice as long, or however the scripture goes. I might be misquoting, but you get the idea. I mean, God apparently doesn't like women very much. It's either that God doesn't like women, or the dudes who wrote the scriptures didn't like women. And I'm going with option 2 on this one.
yeah.
So
I like to point out to people, when they tell me what religion they are, I like to point out to them why they are that religion. And, there's a historical significance to a lot of different people as to why they are the religion that they are. And typically, the origins was not a good thing for, their ancestors. It was it was be religious or die. Those are your choices. And the ancestors, it's religious evolution. I mean, it was survival of those who were willing to take up the religion, and they killed off those who didn't. So, who are you left with? Those who are willing to be religious.
and that's one thing that interests me about the stories about Moses. How he led his people from Egypt, led his people from Egypt, and they like to talk about that as a great shining testimony to the faith that he had in God. What they don't talk about mostly are all of the tribes that he and the Israelites wiped out in the stories in the Bible. He was quite the warlord. If you really want to get down and read what they say happened in the Bible, which we both know didn't really happen, but I mean, he's a bloody figure in the Bible, and he was
Yeah,
killing non-believers. Well, folks that believe differently than believing in Yahweh as the one and only God.
yeah. They made it very clear. If you don't believe in this particular God, you're in trouble.
One
So
thing I found really fascinating, I was watching a series on YouTube called Evidence, and it is a really, really good primer for folks that are just getting into non-belief, or folks that are already into it and maybe are looking for their perspective because they never had faith before.
uh,
Looking for the perspective of a believer moving into non-belief. It's a fantastic series, and it's written from the perspective of a boy or a man who was an ardent believer who became an atheist. Very well put together. But one of those clips in there, it kind of goes into the history of God part. It's called the History of God Part 1, I believe,
mhm.
and it talks about how Yahweh was not actually was didn't start out as a single God, was actually one of a group of gods. And if you look at the scriptures, it kind of if some of the things that are said in the scriptures, like "Thou shalt not have other gods before me," or the one scripture, I can't remember what book it's in, but he literally says God sits in the pantheon of gods, or something of that nature. I know I'm horribly misquoting that, but there are things in the Bible that allude to the fact that God really didn't start out as a monotheistic God. And
I,
it kind
I've
of goes
pointed that out to people. It's like
down.
the first commandment is to have no other gods before me. It's like even your God recognizes that he's not the only God.
Yeah, but again, in the YouTube video
Well,
is
I'll have to look for that link and I'll
you
add it.
never heard of it? I strongly suggest checking it out. It's really good. Not as good as this show, of course, but really good.
So what is your future holds other than your continued involvement with math? What do you see your future holds?
I'm gonna continue to be a good humanist. I'm gonna continue to live my life. I'm gonna continue to speak openly about my non-belief and to encourage others to do the same. And if I can freely do that, I think I'll be a happy camper for the rest of my life.
It's nice to be able to speak in non-fantasy. I guess the only way I people who talk religion, I wonder, it's like how hard do you have to convince yourself that these crazy things you're saying are true? The cognitive dissonance to hold that belief just seems like way too much trouble.
Yeah, we're a rise in homeschooling, so there's that. You also have a bunch of creationist museums that have popped up all over the country. That doesn't help. So they kind of, pick out what they want and then blend it into something that fits into their worldview. I've been to a creationist museum before, and let me tell you, it's worth the price of admission just to go in and check it out. It is hysterical.
Well, it's amazing how every new discovery they have to squeeze into their belief.
Out of the gaps.
And it's before we knew about dinosaurs, there were no dinosaurs, and now
So,
they've got a way to incorporate dinosaurs into.
oh yeah, we must have run the Flintstones was a documentary, pretty much.
Now, when you were growing up, you mentioned, did your family believe that the young Earth, were they young Earth creationists, or?
I never heard it before, so I can't be sure. As you know, every single person that's a believer on Earth has a slightly different notion of what actually went down. If you happen to be, evangelical type, hardcore hardliner, then yes, you're going to believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old. But I don't think that was the case with my family, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think they were just believers, and they just took it at face value. They didn't really look for other things to kind of validate their belief.
Yeah.
Their belief was their belief, and that's just what they rolled with.
I thought you had mentioned it, so I wasn't sure. I was about 17 before I met my first young Earth creationist, and I thought he was just pulling my leg. I couldn't believe anybody could believe that.
And that's the problem with dogma. I mean, you're forced to stick to your guns until proven otherwise, and even when you're proven otherwise, and sometimes people just don't want to let go.
Yeah.
I think
I imagine it's very difficult to believe something your entire life and then admit that you were wrong.
Not only that, but I mean, once it's become a part of your core belief system and it's become a part of your identity, i.e., your religion and your personal identity are now merged together.
Yeah.
I think it's impossible for a lot of people to let it go, and it's not enough to logically set the facts down in front of them and say, well, this is the way it really is.
Yeah.
The mind will find ways to protect the core belief.
Well, I don't try to convince anyone that their beliefs are wrong. I do try to point out that they should question their beliefs because their beliefs make no sense. But my hope is more that they can go ahead and keep believing what they believe. Just don't make their kids believe that stuff. I mean, that's my issue with religion is it's not so much what people believe, but what they try to convince other people to believe.
Now, if I could play devil's advocate for a second, to them, it seems like if they don't teach their children that, then they're condemning their children to eternal damnation. So to them, they are protecting and coddling and doing what's best, and they're doing their responsibilities as good Christians to responsibly bring them into the same religion. For them, it's a duty, and the church has made it so. And it makes sense. If you believe in hell and you believe in heaven, then it makes sense that you would teach your children about it, especially if you believe it.
Yeah.
But they're never going to stop that. I would be, what I'd be happy with? I would be perfectly happy if everybody could believe what they wanted to believe, and it was a personal belief, and nobody expected everybody else to believe what they believe. I don't expect everybody to believe there's no God. I've come to that conclusion myself because I had the freedom to come to those conclusions in my own mind. I had freedom of thought. And that is probably the most important freedom that a person can have. Every other person is free to come to their own conclusions based on what they consider to be evidence. Where I draw the line is that the conclusions that you come to result in me having to believe what you believe or do the things that you do because you believe that they're immoral or you believe that they're wrong or because your God dictates that it's not right. That's where I have a problem. And that is why our founding fathers drew up the Constitution the way they did. We're protected from that. We're supposed to be protected from that, but
Yeah, it's supposed to be.
I think we both know how that works in the end.
I just teaching people religion, and I actually believe that everyone should be taught religion. They should be taught all religions. The best way to keep someone from getting indoctrinated is to inoculate them with lots of information about all the religions. I think that's what helped me. But when people are raised to believe ridiculous things, that makes them susceptible to believing ridiculous things. And that's why you get all these faith healers and these prosperity preachers.
You make a great point. I think there was a study I read about a few months back that said that people that have grown up in religious households have a harder time discerning reality from a fantasy. And I wish I'd read deeper into that to see if it was peer reviewed or if there were more studies done in that vein. But it was something that was being touted quite a bit. And I can see where that would come from because if you're not taught critical thought and you're taught to accept things based on what you're told or how you feel, and those two are actually enough right there to just completely warp your sense of what reality really is. Because if you can shape everything around you to conform to what you think at the time, and you're not willing to change your mind based on new evidence, and it's being reinforced by your feelings, the chances of you coming to a unbiased conclusion are slim and none. It makes it easier, I think, in a person's mind to create scenarios where something can be possible. It gives them a more flexible imagination, so they're more readily able to accept weird stuff like ghosts and Bigfoot and a Loch Ness monster. And well, I'm pretty sure there are aliens out there, but they're not interested in us. Things of that nature.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with that. If I believe wholeheartedly that critical thought should be a core curriculum part of education for everybody. Being able to take things and question them, and then whether you want to believe them or not, go back and look at the evidence for it and be able to make a reasoned decision or choice as to whether or not you accept it as a fact or not. I think if we were to do that worldwide, we'd see a much different planet than we're looking at now.
Chances are, if you're being heavily influenced to believe something specific, that you're being lied to.
Or if you're not encouraged to ask questions, I think is a really big red flag.
Yeah.
If you're encouraged not to ask questions, you should be questioning whether or not you really want to, go with this. But I mean, when you're 5 years old and you're at the age where you're taking information at a breakneck pace, and your parents are your number one role models, and the people around you, your relatives and your schoolmates who more than likely believe the same way you do, or your parents are ensuring, or the people around you are ensuring that you're interacting with other people that believe the same way they do, I should say, chances are that that child is going to pick that up. It's not necessarily a bad thing as long as boundaries are respected. And I think that if every believer took a page out of the UU church, then we wouldn't be sitting here right now having this conversation. because everybody would
Having
be
a prayer
free.
session.
Sorry?
We'd be having a prayer session.
Maybe, but at least nobody would be forcing it down anybody else's throat.
Yeah. My sister is. I tease her. I say she's a born again, or not quite born again. She's in the birth canal. She's not pushy with her religion, but she makes it very clear that it is a very big and very important part of her life. I've got a lot of family members praying for me.
I understand. I get that too. I usually say you too. I just keep it short. I'm sure they get it because I'm not quiet about how I believe. So,
well, I've pretty much always been an atheist, even before I even knew what an atheist was. And so everyone has always known that. So they're not that they're cautious in what they say to me, but they know the response that they're going to get from me. So
I think that's one of the really important things about being open about it, is that it kind of puts yourself out there as, do I really want to push what I believe, knowing that I don't have anything to back it up with except for my faith in this Bible, which this person I know has read and is probably going to pick apart and then tell me things I don't want to hear. So maybe it's better that I don't, voice that.
David Smalley of Dogma Debate, he often has Christians on his show, basically, picking their brains and to find out what they think about things. But he had a live show at Gateway to Reason, and he asked everyone in the audience, which was full of atheists, like, who here has a Bible or Bible app or some form of the Bible at hand? And at least 2/3 of the audience, raised their hand, including myself. And the guest, the Christian, he was so taken aback. It's like, why do you people, if you don't believe it, why do you people have Bibles? It's like, because we'd like to be informed, and knowing the Bible is one of the reasons why we're all atheists, because if you read the Bible, it's hard to believe it.
Kind of like asking somebody, why do you have this poem, The Night Before Christmas, in your house if you don't believe in Santa Claus? Well, it's a nice story.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I believe in Santa Claus, but it's an interesting read, and kids like it, and that's why we have it.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I believe. I mean, I have a Bible and a Quran sitting right behind me on this bookshelf for reference purposes.
I got for my daughter the Brick Bible, which is basically the Bible illustrated with Legos.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
That sounds pretty cool.
It's pretty cool, and it doesn't hold any punches, but I don't want to say glosses over things, but it's laid out like a comic book. So I'm reading this for my daughter, and I'll add to the narrative of what's missing and what these things really mean. And my wife just, and she's the religious person. She doesn't even know these things.
Mm.
But she's just like, why are you telling her these things? Like, because I want her to know. I want her to understand religion is built on really unpleasant things. I mean, reading the Bible, like, the morality of the Bible is horrible. So whenever somebody uses, like, this is our guide to morality, I was like, you got to be kidding me. Do you know what that says? And David Smalley, he's fantastic. He knows the Bible so well. He's able to pluck out a passage, and it's like, this is what you believe. And usually his guess is like, wow, I had no idea it said that. And that's part of the problem, is most Christians have no clue what the Bible says. They've just been, given all the good parts and said, believe this, and they said, okay, because, got them while they were young.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Well, Doug, it is getting late for me.
I imagine. What? It's almost 1 o'clock or 12 or midnight? No, 1. Yeah. So, hey, it was a great talk.
I really appreciate you coming on,
Hey,
and
no problem.
I enjoy this very much. And I hope to you make it to a conference one of these days, so we get to meet in person.
I would love that. I've
Or
been wanting to go
maybe
to conference
I'll
for
go visit my
years.
cousin again. I'll be relatively close
Yeah.
by.
I'll have to talk to my coalition and see if we can make that possible one day. But there's a really good chance that I'm going to be in the 2016 Reason rally. So
I'm hoping to be involved in that.
if things go well, I'll be a part of the color detail. So
Cool. Well, I'm hoping to make it there, so hopefully I'll get to see you there. That'd be
excellent.
cool.
I'll be looking forward to that.
Well, I'm going to wrap this up and say I'm Tom, your friendly neighborhood atheist, and I've been talking to Doug Wright, and this is Secular TV, and thanks for watching.